Toph abandons the world by the time of the Legend of Korra. Now, she does say that she remains connected to the world, that she has achieved a kind of enlightenment, even if she would not phrase her growth in such grandiose, abstract terms, and that she still remains connected to her daughters and to Republic City and to the world despite being physically apart from it. Nonetheless, she does abandon the world. She does find it something that she does not feel any particular connection to. She does not feel the need to continue talking to people. She is perfectly fine with withdrawing into a little cave there in the swamp. Little secluded place. So why? Why does this happen? Why does she do this? And why does it matter? Also, what is the relevance of her acting as she acts? What is the significance of her behaving as she behaves? It is a particular choice, and one I think that needs to be analyzed instead of dismissed or downplayed. The ascetic life is one that is appealing in a world of constant unease and upheaval, a world that does not cohere. In that world, any form of action is inevitably suspect, because to act is to be a part of that world, and thus to be, to a certain extent, blinded. When one commits oneself to a certain practical cause, however noble one's intentions might be, and decides to get involved with the problems of the world, one is innately tied to that world. And thus one loses a kind of perspective. The person involved in the world inevitably is thinking of practical matters. They are inevitably thinking of ways to affect one end or another. That is perfectly fine in an ideal world, a world of clear, lucid understanding, but in the actual world, having to act, having to consider practical ends, means losing that broader perspective that is gained when one is an ascetic, when one leaves the world and has the capacity to consider all forms of life, all factions, all ideologies, from that broader, less self-interested, and more detached perspective. One gains a deeper level of impartial understanding. And that can be very appealing. But it is something that Avatar as a whole has a tricky relationship to, and is a bit skeptical of. The best moment in this show that demonstrates this skepticism, I would say, is when Aang is talking with Yang Chen at the end of Avatar in The Old Masters, episode 319. Aang comes the closest he ever has in this episode to voluntarily choosing a form of detachment. He leaves the world during a time of great crisis, and his friends are quite reasonably a bit worried and even annoyed. Aang has contemplated a kind of detachment during his conversations with the Guru earlier at the end of season 2, but ultimately the idea greatly troubled him. Here he considers it more seriously. He has difficult practical choices to make that blur his understanding of the world. He cannot remain clean in his eyes. He deeply worries about the problems of attempting to act, attempting to affect a kind of change in a convoluted world where any kind of action is morally suspect. He does not want to let the Fire Lord win. To do that would be gruesome. And yet, he deeply does not want to kill the Fire Lord because of his own personal morals, his own beliefs. He wants to have that abstracted position to look at issues philosophically and impartially without passion or desperation, but he can't do that. Yang Chen says very clearly to him that yes, many air nomads have achieved enlightenment through detaching themselves from the world, through not associating with its problems, and thus being able to see those problems more clearly instead of having to come up with demands for action in the sphere of practical utilitarian life. But the Avatar, she insists, is innately tied to the world. They can't escape. They need to act. The world depends on their acting. And yes, there is a loss to that. There is a loss of purity and even a loss of understanding. But action is necessary nonetheless. And this lines up with the ideas talked about in a lot of text regarding detachment. The Buddha famously wants to choose a middle path, a way between complete asceticism and complete attachment to the world. It is viewing the conception of attachment or non-attachment as ultimately meaningless and something not to be fixated on. That is a more doctrinally Buddhist perspective, I would say. The idea that detachment can itself become an ideal. It can become a kind of attachment in of itself. It's not that attachment is good. It's simply that trying to escape from detachment can become its own kind of detachment. And then you have something a bit different like the Bhagavad Gita, great Hindu text, that is about this problem of action versus inaction. It is about a growing recognition of the need to act in a world of great uncertainty, even while acknowledging the potential for error and the potential for acting wrongly and mistakenly when trapped in that world of turmoil and action and chaotic conflicted behavior. So I don't think we can quite say that the show firmly approves of Toph's choice to gain a kind of detachment. It is a defeat in a way. And she can say what she wants, but she is genuinely estranged from Lin, her daughter, and Lin is deeply troubled by this, even if Toph at least acts like she's not. We also get hints that she was estranged from Suyin, at least for a while, at least to a certain extent, and that relationship had a lot of healing to do. We see that Toph's relationships with her daughters are very strained. Lin desperately wants to emulate Toph, to be quite like her. And this doesn't satisfy Toph, according to Lin. And I think one could say that's because Toph is not entirely happy with herself either. Also, we see that she's not happy with Sue, the criminal, the delinquent, the person who desperately acts out, more to get attention than anything else. Sue was a problem child. She fully admits that now. She has grown, and though she is far from perfect and makes a lot of mistakes throughout Korra, which is in part what makes her such an interesting character, she has indeed grown quite a bit. But there was a lot of problems, a lot of conflicts. Also, there's the case that neither of the girls' dads seem to be in the picture. We know who Lynn's dad is, but we don't know much of anything about him. We don't know who Sue's dad is. I've heard some people theorize that it might be Sokka. I'm not going to talk about that here, but I will just say it is a distinct possibility. In any case, it is possible to likely that her kids remind her to a certain extent of her failed romantic relationships, which is not fair on the kids, but I think is kind of inevitable to an extent. She does not seem to have had the most happy and joyful life after the end of Avatar: The Last Airbender. I guess that's what I'm saying. She does not seem to have had the best luck romantically. She does not seem to have had the best luck professionally, even. She does achieve great things. She does have statues built in her honor. But she ultimately leaves the police force in disgrace after facing another moral conflict, how to act, how to behave when her professional duties and her duties as a mom are in conflict. Toph also does not seem like she was the best mom in the world. From what we see of her, she is very busy, which is not necessarily her fault, but does cause some degree of separation and leads, I think, to her kids really wanting more attention from her. And also, she's just a bit cold and distant as a person compared to some of the other characters in the show. She does not open up particularly easily. And again, if she was hurt to an extent romantically by the fathers of her two kids, that might increase her desire to separate herself from any kind of real attachment, any kind of real emotional connection. So Toph is very much a symbol, an emblem of a modern kind of disenchantment with the world. I think about Matthew Arnold and some of his work, such as stanzas from the Grand Chartreuse. He contemplates modernity as being a mess, as being convoluted, constantly anxious, bereft of any certainty or continuity. And that leads to struggles on a societal lens, but also on a personal level. And so it spurs this desire for kind of detachment from the world. I don't mean to imply that Toph's life was all gloom and doom after the events of Avatar: The Last Airbender. I do mean to say that Toph, even in Avatar, always had a tendency to project this image of toughness, of cool, of confidence, while secretly being very insecure. And based on everything that seems to have happened to her after the events of Avatar, I can only see those tendencies getting worse instead of better. I don't mean to be too gloomy about Toph, but I do mean to say that she detached herself from the world for a reason. She has always been more at home with the natural environment, with all the critters and creatures of the world. She does perhaps not know of the cosmic irony that she happens to spend the rest of her life in the place wherein Aang first sees a image of her, but it is a place of peace and serenity for her. It's weird, it's bizarre, it's very isolated, but in a way that fits the earthy Toph. Detachment does come to her as a kind of genuine enlightenment, a kind of satisfaction and release. She seems mostly content by the end of The Legend of Korra, but there still is that cost. There still is that sense of deep disappointment, I think, that is implied heavily throughout Korra that led her into this life of seclusion. So anyway, thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can, and you want to see more videos like this before anyone else. What do you think about why Toph detached herself from the world, why she made the choices that she did? There is a lot of story to be told there. I will just say that. So take care, keep watching Avatar. Adios, comrades.